Good afternoon. I'm Shirley Malcolm. I head Education and Human Resources Programs at the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS. AAAS is one of the partners in the AAAS-Lemelson Invention Ambassadors Program. We are the largest general scientific organization in the world, founded in 1848, and publisher of the Science family of journals. We know that there is a strong connection between Science Magazine and Thomas Edison, and so in a way it's important that we be here. And so we are thrilled, and we thank our host here for a wonderful event, and I want to turn it over to my partner from Lemelson.
Thank you. My name is Alexander Nicolas. I am a program officer at the Lemelson Foundation. I also manage our relationship with AAAS. First of all, I would like to thank AAAS, particularly Yolanda and her team, for putting together this extraordinary event. But I also want to thank you for the partnership. At the foundation, you have opened our eyes to new possibilities, and I just hearing more from the conversation today, seems like everyone's inspired and excited to be here. I also want to thank our host at the Edison House. I couldn't think of a more fitting way to acknowledge a group of inventors who are changing the world we exist in. So thank you once again. So a year and a half ago, Yolanda and I met. We brainstorming about the program. And the question is, why this program? Why are we interested in starting this program? And so three reasons really popped out, and I think it really captures some of the conversation today and some of our tours. The first is we really want to highlight the value of inventors and invention in our society. I think often that's taken for granted, and as a result, the pathway and the pipeline to really cultivate that next generation of inventors is missing from our policy and program discussions. Secondly, we wanted to provide a platform for inventors to speak with policymakers and influencers. We believe these are the people who are creating education programs to train the next generation, and these are the people who are creating the policies to say how invention-based businesses are supported and launched. So we really wanted to provide that platform for inventors to connect with these people. And secondly, we really wanted to draw attention to those ingredients within the invention ecosystem that makes it go. We talked today a lot about education. We talked about talent development. We talked about supporting invention-based businesses. And these are just part of the puzzle. So I really look forward to this group of inventors really digging in and see what we could do together. So to give you a quick bit about the foundation, since our founding, the foundation has focused intently on the power of invention to improve lives. We believe invention can solve many of the biggest social and economic challenges of our time. It is why we support strengthening the ecosystem for invention across the United States and the developing world. We were really pleased and excited that we have one of our colleagues from India was part of the inaugural class for the inventors. So much credit to Yolanda and her team for really bringing in Soren. So why do we do this? We do this by investing in organizations that inspire young and emerging inventors to solve problems through invention. We provide inventors with the knowledge and tools they need to do their best work, and we help to launch invention-based businesses and support them at the early stage of technology development. We talked a lot about today, those are probably the most vulnerable times. Some folks call it the valley of death. And so we really focus intently on how do we support and cultivate those really early stage businesses that could be transformative in our economy. So why does this matter? We know invention-based businesses create jobs, they spark economic growth, and they hold this really unique power to transform lives. So in closing, I said this earlier during our private meeting, but I really want to thank a remarkable inaugural class of inventors. I really believe this sincerely, that when we talked about the program, we had no idea people like you would be interested in this program. So we are absolutely humbled that you would be interested in this program, and we hope we can live up to your expectation and support you so you can do your best work. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Yolanda Chan with AAAS, and I direct the AAAS-Lemelson Invention Ambassadors Program. I just want to welcome you again and let you know what the program is going to look like. It's a short program, but this gives us the opportunity to hear from the invention ambassadors themselves. And we're going to start with Steve Stassen, and he's going to talk about what we're calling Celebrate Invention, which we've done throughout the program. And we hadn't had the opportunity to hear Steve's Celebrate Invention talk yet, which is his way of celebrating invention and what invention is meant to him. It's basically the Steve Stassen story. And then we're going to hear from the rest of our invention ambassadors, and they're each going to just talk 5 minutes about one thing that they would like us to know. So we've been hearing from this cohort for the entire year, but we're going to just 5 minutes of just one thing that they really want us to leave with as they transition out of their formal ambassadorship to hopefully a deeper, more collaborative relationship with us. So Steve, thank you.
Thanks. I'm going to move this a little bit so you can hear me and see the slides. How's that? Okay? Yeah, so finally I get a chance to give this talk, okay? It's been like a year, and it's not unusual for me to be behind like this. But this is a talk that I agree with. Someone was talking about Randy, who started talking us through these initial talks. And I found him also quite interesting. And he coaxed this talk out of me, which I've never done this before, this particular aspect of it. But it was kind of fun to revisit it. I want to talk a little bit about invention, but particularly I want to talk about what I call the confirmation moment. And to me, it's a very personal thing, but it's that moment where your idea or your invention or your vision first gets appreciated by somebody else in the room. Okay? It's the first time it leaves from your head to somebody else saying, wow. You hear the word wow in your ear, right? And that to me is a really critical thing, because up to that time you really have no data, nothing to support this wow moment. And very often inventors have to spend a lot of their time putting on a brave face saying, yeah, this is going to work, right, to the world around them. But inside, there's a private cloud of uncertainty, right, that says, it may not work, right? And in fact, you really get afraid of maybe it not working in a very public way and sort of being embarrassed, right? And so embarrassed, sort of publicly. And so that's kind of a scary thought. So as a young inventor, it was with that thought in mind that I practiced my Gilda Radner impression. Now, and I started working on all-electronic still camera, what you call a digital camera today, in 1975. And in 1975, Saturday Night Live also started their historic run. And they had, as you might remember, at least some of you in the audience might remember this, where they had a fantastic group of young comedians that started off that show. And one of those was Gilda Radner. And Gilda Radner brought a whole bunch of screwball characters to the screen, but one of her artists was Emily Litella. Now, Emily Litella was an old lady who had very strong opinions about certain subjects. And she would go on at great length about a subject, telling you all the reasons why her opinion was correct, and then would be publicly called on the carpet because she misheard a critical word in the subject she was discussing. Okay? So an example of this is she went on one time, a long time, about a Supreme Court hearing about the death penalty. And she went on long and hard about why deaf people should not be penalized, as they had enough problems already, right? And then she went on for several minutes, and then quietly another person on the panel would say, it's death penalty. And in which case she would stop talking, look down, crinkle her nose, and that's why I have that picture, because that's exactly how she looked. And she would look in the camera, and she would say, never mind. That's my Gilda Radner impression. And you see, I was working on a concept that I thought would work, electronic photography. But I had no proof at all about this. In fact, I was working in the Eastman Kodak Company surrounded by the foremost imaging scientists in the world. And I was all of about 25, so everybody was older than me, smarter than me, richer than me, and more powerful than me. And so my biggest fear, okay, was to be talking at length about my vision about what would happen with the possibilities of an all-electronic still camera. And then one of these people come up and say, but Sasson, what about some fundamental law of physics or something else like that? What about that? And in which case, I would be publicly embarrassed, and then I would say, never mind, right? And so that's why I practiced my Emily Latella impression most mornings before going to work during that year I was working on the first digital camera. That was until I got my confirmation moment. That happened in well, let me tell you a little bit about where I worked here. This was, I started working in 1973, but in 1975, I was working in an applied research laboratory at Eastman Kodak Company. It was a fantastic place to work. There was scientists of all different types, and they worked on all different problems, new product ideas, solving product problems, solving manufacturing problems, all different types of technologies. I was in the electronics research group. I was the youngest engineer there. My supervisor came in to me and said one day, hey, we've got a project for you. We've got this new type of device called the charge-coupled device imager that just became available. Why don't you get one and play with it? And I was very interested in that type of a device because I had done some work on how light affected silicon in college. And so I jumped at the chance to do this. Our conversation took about maybe 40 seconds, 50 seconds, something like that. And that was about it. And so I thought, okay, if I look at this device. Now, these devices were pieces of silicon that you would shine light on and make an exposure on, and it would create a corresponding charge pattern that would mimic the exposure pattern that was on the surface. And you could read those things out, that charge pattern out, and subsequently reproduce electrically the image that was incident on the surface of the piece of silicon. It was relatively new technology invented by Boyle and Smith at Bell Labs in '69, but first became commercially available in late 1974 in a small device, a 100 by 100 array. And so nobody told me to build a camera. I just thought about, well, why don't I just go ahead and try to capture an image and see what the resolution would be, what the MTF would be, that kind of thing. And then I said, well, if I'm going to capture something, why don't I put it in something portable and capture the charge pattern? Hey, that's like a picture. That's like a camera, actually, isn't it? And so I thought, well, okay, I'll try to build a camera, and then how would I analyze this? Well, the best way to analyze a picture is to look at it. So I thought I'd try to build some sort of a playback system that would take this charge pattern and reconstruct it on a television screen. So that was the idea. And then because I was surrounded by mechanical engineers, because photographic equipment was largely mechanical contraptions and elegance of all kinds, I thought I'd try to build something with no moving parts at all. Now, I had no idea how to build this thing. And so for the next year, it was a lot of trial and error in a back lab with no supervision, because nobody knew I was working on this, because nobody really cared. But after about a year, this is what showed up. This is the world's first digital camera. Beautiful, isn't it? Beauty's in the eye of the beholder, but believe me, that's beautiful. It was about the size of a toaster, weighed about 8.5 pounds. And I would take still pictures of this, and it would be captured on a magnetic tape there. It was a completely digital product right there. And the confirmation moment came when we built both this camera and a playback system. I'll show you in a minute. And we had to do that over the whole year, inventing as we went along, because nobody had built anything like this before. So I couldn't find anything in a library or in a paper or anything like this. So we invented stuff as we went along, and all we saw for the whole duration was just voltage measurements and oscilloscope traces. That was it. We never saw anything. So finally we got both parts working, and I talked to my technician who worked with me, Jim Schickler, and we decided, well, we got to take a picture of something, but we were working in this awfully dim-lit back lab. It was the most unphotogenic place in the world. And so we walked down the hallway and found this young lady here. Her name was Joy Marshall. And she asked if she could sit for a head and shoulders shot, which is what I did. I took a head and shoulders shot. Exposure 50 milliseconds, but it took 23 seconds to store it to the tape. So it was captured in a short time, but it took 23 seconds to record to the tape. So as the tape was recording, I walked back to the laboratory. We put the tape out, put it in the playback system, and after about 30 seconds, up popped the image. And it was incredible. You could actually see her. All right? It was unbelievable, okay? We had a few problems in getting that first image up, but it was really unbelievable to see it. And I just got really excited. This was like the first time in over a solid year of working on it that I actually saw the thing, right? I felt it, I dreamed it, but I never saw it. And so standing there looking at that, that was my confirmation moment. But there's more to the story than that, because what do you do when you come up with a system like this? Well, you got to show it to somebody, right? Well, here's the problem. I was in Eastman Kodak Company. And as you know, Eastman Kodak Company was the premier photographic manufacturer in the world, had been for, let's say, 100 years. So I came in and I said, let me demonstrate this to you. I called my demonstration to management, I called it filmless photography, which was a bad choice of titles, you know, to warm up the audience, right? But here's what it was. I would take that camera that you see over here, and then I would, this was the playback system we talked about up here. And then just to show you what the images kind of look like, this was a test target, and that was what it was reproduced on the television set. So you could see it wasn't great photography, but it was recognizable. And it was trying to demonstrate a system that didn't involve some of the normal ways of thinking about photography. And so I demonstrated this to a series of managers, not by talking about it, but by doing it. I would walk into the room and take their picture before I said anything. And then after 2 pictures were taken, I would take the tape, put it in there, and up would pop their images. And so the discussion ensued about this. Now, I had had my confirmation moment, but they didn't have theirs, because there was a lot of pushback on this. First question was, why would anybody want to do this, right? Because, quite frankly, this whole approach to electronic photography doesn't make a lot of sense to them, right? Why would anybody want to view their pictures on a television set? Been doing prints for over 100 years. We've been successful. Everybody's happy with it. Nobody's having a problem with it. Why do you want to do this, right? Oh, and by the way, Sasson, this thing called electronic photo album, what's that? Well, there's no personal computers or anything, so you can understand their frame of reference, right? So there were a lot of questions, right? When would it be commercially available? When would you get color in this? How would you get reliability? And the fact that it was digital was a real no-no, too, because digital had a very bad reputation back then. There were no consumer digital products like there are today. So they really had a challenge that I really couldn't answer. And that's the first time I realized my confirmation moment was different than the rest of the world's confirmation moment, right? In fact, we spent a lot of time for the next 30 years trying to answer some of those things. But I had to write a technical report when I was done with this toward the end of 1976. I wrote a technical report. It was about 100 pages or so. It described in excruciating detail all of the technical things that were required to make this thing work. But I thought, as a result of the conversations I had, at least I could share my confirmation moment with whoever would read this, which was probably all of about 12 people in the history of its existence. But I wrote a paragraph called The Camera of the Future, where I wrote down kind of, now I could publicly sort of write down what I was thinking while I was building this thing. But I didn't write anything down while I was doing it because I hadn't seen it yet. Confirmation moment, I had the confidence to write this down. So I wrote this in 1976. And you can see I didn't say anything bad about the existing technology, but I was certainly excited about this. And I must tell you that I worked for the next 30 years, actually more than that, more than 30 years, in trying to satisfy the other confirmation moments that needed to be made in order to make this happen. And I was not able to, actually I never even, what I just told you now, I was not allowed to talk about until the year 2001. I couldn't share any of this stuff outside the company until 2001, when Kodak was kind of happy that they had invented the digital camera. So 30 years later, you can see kind of what's happened. And 30 years represents this picture over here. These were some cameras in about 2005 or so, next to the original prototype. And then I add another 10 years or so, and you have cell phones. And that was, I think in 2014, there's over 100 billion still images taken. And there are more, certainly more digital cameras sold now than ever before of any kind of camera. And they exceeded the number of film cameras, I think, in around 2005 for that. So it was a sea change, but it took better part of my professional life to see it happen. And all along the way, you had to come up with different confirmation moments in order to satisfy different aspects of it. Largely in the 80s, it was largely technical issues with respect to image storage and what we call now solid-state memory and those kinds of things, image compression technology. We developed all of that stuff, but you had to prove each one of those things and get a confirmation moment and then move on to the next one. And then in the 90s, the business model confirmation moments, and then things like that where Kodak faced those kinds of things. So it was a long thing, a series of those things, but that first one is really quite something. It's personal. It's something, if it happens to you, you'll never forget it. It's a wonderful thing to think back. I remember how I felt when I saw that image. And so it's a very nice, to me, it's a very nice memory. And I think if Emily Latella were here, I think she would probably say that the confirmation moment takes the never out of never mind, I guess, right? So that's what it does. Thank you very much.
Okay, to make life easy, we'll just hear from the rest of the invention ambassadors alphabetically. So Karen Berg, Soreen Grama, Paul Sandberg, and then Paul Stamets. Thanks.
Thanks. Great. So I was afraid she'd go with the alphabetical route, knowing that would be me next. So I did want to thank the Edison National Park staff for a fantastic day and for hosting the event. Awesome, incredible, just overwhelming amount of knowledge that we were given, and quite frankly, I don't know what I could say to that would have any impact based on what we've heard this morning. We were asked to talk about one sort of fact or one lesson related to invention. And so as I reflected on the year, I reflected how we started the year, and my message last year was that invention and innovation really centers around collaboration and diversity of thought, and I stand by that very much. And I claim that it's a collaborative effort, this idea of invention and innovation. Not necessarily, oftentimes with other people, but even an individual inventor has collaboration of thought by virtue of being exposed to different things in the universe. Looking around, it's really a collaboration of ideas that individual has. And so as I work, I'm an academician, and so I work with a large number of students, and I certainly had a large focus on that over that population over the past year. And as I talk with them, one of the driving points that I make is that you need to put yourself in very different situations than you would normally migrate toward. And you need to make yourself a little bit uncomfortable. In fact, Eleanor Roosevelt had a wonderful quote saying you need to do one thing every day that terrifies you. I do tell my students we don't need to jump off tall buildings with parachutes, but we do need to challenge ourselves by doing something that makes you a little bit uncomfortable, or perhaps you're just gliding through life and you're not exposing yourself to those different perspectives and therefore to the opportunities for invention and innovation. So I thought I'd just briefly share some of my thoughts about how can we make ourselves uncomfortable? What are some of the sources of discomfort with respect to invention? The first one is simply being, at the front edge, having an idea that no one else has had and formulating that out loud. I remember very specifically as a new graduate student hearing my advisor give a talk. He was a biomedical engineer, and he was talking about a drug delivery system that would be implanted in somebody and would release drugs when the body temperature fluctuated. So, for example, inflammation, wound healing, and it would release drugs. And I remember thinking, wow, that's an amazing idea. And then I remember everybody, all his so-called colleagues, which would imply collegial behavior, jumping on him and telling him that was the most ridiculous thing they'd ever heard, and people would be killed, because these systems would release drugs at the wrong time. And I remember as a new graduate student thinking, maybe I made a grave error signing on to this individual, because everybody seems completely against him and calling him names and telling him basically that he doesn't know what he's talking about. And that had to be that was terrifying for me, and it had to be somewhat unsettling for him, but he was adamant. He knew what he was doing. He was a pioneer in the field. And this was the way he lived. He was always out on the front edge, which was often very isolating. That was uncomfortable. So being at the front edge can be a very strong source of discomfort. Being the least knowledgeable person in the room, putting oneself into a room that has different perspectives, can be a source of great discomfort as well. Often misinterpreting. I know in my own experiences, I often jump into rooms with clinicians. This is a very different field. I'm a biomedical engineer. I'm very familiar with designing devices, but as far as applying them. And on 2 occasions, and I laugh now looking back, I totally misinterpreted pictures that I was shown that I assumed, were the way that these devices were being applied. Turns out they were actually marketing images, and the devices were being positioned for the camera in certain fashion. I interpreted differently because I was interpreting from my world, and it was a very embarrassing conversation to have, having developed ideas and processes based on my misinterpretation. And what happened was my misinterpretation and the fortunate ability to be able to admit that I had misinterpreted led to the aha moment that, okay, that wasn't what we intended, but wow, that's a pretty new direction. And so it actually turned into 2 ideas that turned into inventions and were things that, one of which is now currently available. And it was because of that awkward moment, knowing, I'm the least knowledgeable person in the room, I'm interpreting things from my own perspective, and I have a lot of discomfort with that. So having lack of information and misinterpreting can be a huge source of discomfort. Interacting with individuals who have very different perspectives can be very uncomfortable. We tend to migrate toward people that think like us, look like us, sound like us, and with whom we share very common interests. And again, that doesn't challenge us. That's not a source of discomfort. And during my visits this past year, I visited a university where there were 2 former collegiate athletes who had gone on to professional athlete careers and come back to their alma mater. And they had seen real-world problems, and they had not been exposed as collegiate athletes to the science and technology classes, in order to solve these problems, but they recognized that these were really complex problems, and they understood people because during their collegiate careers, they had met many people and seen many parts of the globe. And they knew the importance of working as a team because that's what they did. They were athletes. They worked as a team, and they knew that this was the way to get things done. And so they came and they had given back to students, and they had built essentially an invention room that was a hodgepodge of things. I mean, it was a room that they had designed knowing that this was a magnet to get students in that room and working together. It did have some athletic themes to it, basketball goals and treadmills and things like this, but it was just this hodgepodge, sort of Alice in Wonderland room, because they knew they needed a collection. The students needed to be somewhat distracted from the usual mentality of, I need to migrate to someone that looks like me, sounds like me, thinks like me. And it was the most wonderful example of getting somebody out of their comfort zone and for the students to feel a little bit of discomfort, and the room was abuzz, and it was amazing the things that they were talking about and sharing without even having purposely done so. So that can be interacting with individuals who don't think, sound, look like us can make us uncomfortable. And so again, my message for the year is dare to be uncomfortable, because that's to me what it takes to formulate a collaborative team, and that to me, again, is at the heart of invention and innovation. So I would like to thank very much my AAAS and Lemelson family for allowing me the privilege of working on this, allowing me the privilege really to synthesize, to observe, and to interact with a whole range of individuals this year. It has, quite frankly, confirmed that in the world of academia, I'm where I was destined to be and where I love to be. I absolutely love the ability to influence our budding inventors as they find their invention sea legs, and it's been an outstanding experience, and I can't thank you all enough for that.
here. Take it into the side. So we were talking earlier about failure and how is that part of the process of invention. So I figured I'd tell you my story and how I went from failure to we'll see what we found. So it was the last day of February 2011, and I was with my team in southern India. We're installing the latest version of our milk refrigeration system for a paying customer. And we just finished the installation that day. We're very excited. We brought in the owner of this dairy to take a look at it. And he looked at it once and he said, this is not going to work. It's too big, it's too expensive, and it doesn't have enough performance. And that was a very devastating moment for us because we just spent an entire year coming up with this design, which we thought was going to be the one design that was going to win. And so we're trying to figure out what to do. I mean, this was, we began this journey of developing a milk refrigeration system about 4 years earlier. In 2007, I graduated from school and I went to India for the first time. I'm not from India, but I went to India looking for business opportunities with my business partner. And we discovered this unmet need in the dairy industry. Now you may ask yourself, why India? Well, Indian dairy industry is the largest in the world. They consume and produce the most amount of milk in the world. And in India, it just loves milk. And what we discovered in that trip is that a lot of this milk is collected from small individual farmers that bring small amounts of milk to village collection centers, 5, 10 liters of milk. All that milk is pulled together into a collection center and then taken out as quickly as possible to a processing center or a chilling center. All of this is done without any refrigeration in very hot conditions. So as you can imagine, a lot of this milk will spoil, or it gets to the market in very bad quality. So much so that it becomes even a food threat. Like in India, for example, people will boil milk even after they buy it from the store and it's pasteurized. They'll boil it because they're not sure of the quality of that incoming milk. So this was the problem that was posed to us actually by a dairy. So, nothing else better to do. We decided, well, let's say we get this problem worth solving. We actually had some investors lined up that were willing to put money on it. Seemed like, and we started a company trying to solve this particular problem. So for the next, so we had a really big market. It seemed like the right thing to do, but we didn't have any technology at this point. When I came out of grad school, I didn't have a PhD or anything like that that we could apply for this. I didn't have any, license from an academic institution. I didn't even have experience in refrigeration, for that matter. So, pretty naive at this, but in some ways, many inventors will tell you that helps you because you can break the norms, you can start fresh. So we began fresh. The only thing I had in mind for this was I wanted to use solar power because I had a bit of experience with solar power, and this was mid-2000s, and solar power was just becoming economical, and to be honest, it was becoming a little trendy. So that was the only thing I put in my sort of bias, so to say, is like we can use solar power to solve the problem here. Just to go back a little bit, what the real ultimate problem why they don't have refrigeration systems in India, in villages, is maybe some of you have been visited there. They don't have reliable electricity in those villages. So you can't really put a commercial refrigeration system because you immediately would have to couple it with a diesel generator, and that doubles the cost of the entire system and triples the operating cost. So nobody really did any refrigeration because of that unreliable electricity. So that's why we thought, solar power would be something that we could use. Well, without much experience in this, as you can imagine, we had a lot of failures right from the beginning. I think I spent the first year looking at an approach that would marry solar power with thermoelectrics, which is a method of providing cooling by running a current through a special material, a joint of two materials. One side gets hot, one side gets cold. And it took me a year to realize it was not going to be efficient enough. So, scratch that and start from the beginning. The next iteration of it was, well, let's try a business model innovation now. What if we can actually take ice into the village? All these trucks that pick up the milk, they go and empty into the village and come back with all that milk. So why don't we put ice on the truck? It goes into the village, delivers that ice, we use that ice to chill the milk, and then they come back full of milk. Sounded great, right? We built a small prototype. We actually went to India and put it in a village, installed it, And no, that didn't work. 10 or 8 out of 10 people that came to visit it, it's like, I have enough trouble with my milk, collecting my milk. I don't want to have to deal with ice now. So that didn't work. And now here in 2011, we were back with our third prototype, which was now a full-fledged solar-powered refrigeration system. We actually had the customer paying for this, so they spurred us to continue the development and said, no, I'll buy this if you build it. So we built it in our Boston labs, and we went to India and installed it. And this is where it was, February 2011, when we had that devastating moment. So, I was wondering if this failure was going to kill the company. I mean, really, we're almost at the end of the road here. We're running out of funds. We didn't know where else we could go from here. We tried 2 different approaches. This was the third one that failed. And so it made me think about my failures, the previous failures, and how we were able to overcome them. And in all of our previous failure, we did 2 things that I think were very important. First of all, we analyzed each failure, and so we took a very introspective approach. Well, what didn't work? How can we modify it? What assumptions did we make that we can change? And so having that introspection helped us recalibrate very quickly and try a different approach. The other thing that was very important for us was perseverance. I think, we persevered despite all the different failures, and, I think inventors, it's kind of built into them that they're stubborn. They just continue in the face of all these failures. And there's no better example in this than Thomas Edison, right, whose famous quote that, I'd never failed, I just found 10,000 ways that didn't work, right? So failure coupled with introspection and perseverance seemed to kind of let us to success somewhat. In fact, we always came up with better designs. Every time we failed, we turned a corner and we came up with a slightly better innovation. And from our first failed design, we developed a thermal energy storage, a crude thermal energy storage device, which we ended up, will play a significant role later. And in our second failure, we actually developed a rapid way of chilling the milk because we realized we needed to, we didn't have much time and we had to crash cool that milk very quickly. So all of these things helped us become better and better. But now I was sitting here wondering, is this going to be the end of the road? Really, we were running out of money. And then, trying to figure out what to do, my team members, I spent the next few weeks in India trying soul searching, trying to figure out what we're going to do. My team members were telling me, it's like, look, Serene, the reason this thing is not working, it's because it's too expensive. We have to drop solar power out of this picture. And mind you, I was very passionate about this because, I told you that was my main bias, and I wanted to develop a solution that was environmentally conscious, that was, appropriate, and so I was very reluctant to give up this solar power idea. So I spent some time thinking about it, and then, there was a moment, I remember, like, Steve, you talked about moment of confirmation. There was a moment for me when I realized that, well, I'm solving the wrong problem here. The problem is the unreliable electricity, the grid electricity. What I was solving the problem of is unreliable solar power. With solar power, you only have it during the day. And milk is a 365-day-a-year, 24-hour-a-day kind of operation. It was only available during the day, and it's not available very much during the monsoon. So we were spending a lot of time developing methods to back up the solar power. And for those of you who know solar power, you need some form of energy storage with solar power, or else it's not really very effective. So we were spending all this time developing solutions for the solar power, but the real problem was the unreliable electricity grid. So when we dropped the idea of solar power, all of a sudden, so the fog just cleared, and I realized the grid is the problem, and the energy storage solution that we had already developed was perfectly suited for solving that problem. And so over the year, in the previous couple of years, we developed this thermal energy storage device. We call it thermal battery, which is a way to create ice. Basically, when you form ice, when you freeze water, you store energy, and when you melt that ice, you release the energy. It's thermal energy. So, and we found a way to kind of package it nicely into a we call it a battery, not an electrical battery, but a thermal battery. So once I realized that I was solving the wrong problem, and I dropped the solar power idea, I was able to see this thermal battery as the ultimate solution. And fortunately, right around that time, it was like a couple of months later, we got a grant from the National Science Foundation. and a grant from Vilgro, which is Lemelson is supporting. And so we were lucky enough to get some money very quickly. And within 6 months, we had another prototype. And this time, I focused all my energy on designing this thermal battery to bring it down in size, bring it down in cost, and make it more efficient. And with that prototype, we went back literally 6 months later, and we installed it at a customer, and it finally worked. And it really worked. It didn't matter when the grid was on or off, day, time, night, evening, didn't matter. We're able to keep that milk chilled because we had this battery as a backup. The battery would kick in whenever the power was out, it would kick in, it will continue chilling the milk, and it kept it cold for a period of 24 hours, and then they could take it out and process it and do whatever they had to do. So that story is, that's how I turned that failure into a success, because we analyzed what we're doing, we're introspective, and we persevered on it. I think that's the lesson that I would give to anyone. You want to celebrate your failures. You don't want to be afraid of them. And it's the beginning of a new road, and if you persevere enough, I think you'll find a solution. Right now, just as a sort of corollary to this, we now have about 100 systems installed in India. They're fairly big systems, so it's not an easy system to install. It's about total, in terms of megawatt hours of energy storage, almost 3 megawatt hours of energy storage that's helping the grid, the unreliable grid. And we continue to get orders. We just got a big order a couple of months ago. So it's great. It's good. Thank you so much.
So I'm going to move it back here, Steve. So I'm Paul. Oh. So the next two speakers actually will be two Pauls. I'm Paul Sandberg, and I came here so I could wear my Edison tie. I was all excited, and then they sell them here. I thought, this is so cool. It's so cool, so I just bought a gold one. It's so inspiring to hear from these inventors, and I didn't know what I was going to talk about, honestly, until I've listened and I've come here. And there's another quote. Soren mentioned, where's Soren? He moved on to somewhere. There he is. He mentioned about failure. But there's another quote out there that really rang a bell, and that was 1% inspiration, 99% perspiration of Thomas Edison. And it's true. And as an inventor, we heard from Steve earlier how it's taken 35 years to finalize and see a cultural change that's amazing for what you first saw in imaging. And so during the year as an invention ambassador, I've not talked about this much, but I thought I would. And that is, as I look back, and I think it really takes a lot of perspiration to be an inventor and to keep moving forward. And one of the areas, for those that don't know me, the areas that I've worked in, I'm a medical person, and we've worked in how do we repair the brain? How do we repair brain damage? And how do we move forward? I mean, we're all susceptible to this. I don't know how many people have any kind of stroke or heart disease in their family. Let's see your hands if that's something you're all worried about. Most people. And so for years, I've probably been in this about 35 years as well, and we were looking for ways in which to repair brain damage that occurred from many different ways. Primarily Parkinson's disease was an early one for me. And we were trying to find drugs, we're trying to find cell therapies, trying to find different approaches to see if we could repair that. Diet, nutraceuticals, you name it. And about 15 years ago, my father died of a stroke, and it really, really profoundly hit me. And the reason I bring it up now is because another very close family member had a stroke earlier a few months ago, and I look back and I say, how far have we come in this? In medical school, you learn there's not much you can do for stroke. If you can get them to the hospital within 3 hours, maybe 6 hours at a nice stroke facility, you can give them some treatment for stroke that might have a blood clot related to it. But how do we fix it? A third of people are going to get
are going to die from a stroke, a third will be fine, and a third will have chronic problems. So at that time, I was looking, what can we do? And we found out that we could, in fact, there was a field of stem cells were developing. And so what we worked on was adult stem cells. And we started to put in, we had the aha moment, and we worked on these the cells that weren't embryonic, and we put them in animals that had strokes, and we found that we could see recovery. And that led then to the invention of the idea of being able to put these cells directly into the brain at a stroked area, which would induce repair of that part of the brain. And so we ended up, with getting funding, being involved with a company, and for the first time ever, about, a few years after my dad died, implanting cells into a stroke patient for the first time. And that technology has continued to develop. It took a real beating, and we've talked about funding earlier. It took a real beating during the financial crisis, especially for small companies. But it's come back. It's been licensed again, and a clinical trials just finished in England with a company where they have implanted a number of patients with these types of cells. The other was, though, I wanted as an inventor, was really to talk about don't rely on one product, especially in medicine. And medicine can take a lot of time, because it's not about, I found a cell that might work, I found a drug. There's so many other issues. What's the dose you're going to give? What's the timing of it? What's the patient? What's the inclusion criteria? What are the symptoms? All these things can affect how the outcome of this treatment can have. So we've worked on umbilical cord blood-derived stem cells. We were the first to patent that we could actually make neurons and brain cells out of umbilical cord blood. The first to patent that we could make brain cells out of bone marrow cells. Just yesterday I was telling Paul Stamets, he's good luck for me, or just today, I'm sorry, that seems whenever we get together I get a new patent. And there's a patent that we just got actually where we were able to find, is a patent for stem cells out of menstrual blood, that in fact the endometrial tissue releases, and there's stem cells in there. We found that they may be useful for stroke as well. So since then, over a 15-year period, there's been a number of clinical trials in most of these areas. There's a number of companies that are out there and started it. The one that really intrigues me is umbilical cord blood, because when they're derived from blood as a natural thing, we can actually administer the cells intravenously after a stroke, and we can see repair because the cells will go up and help repair the brain and help induce repair of our own body's repair mechanisms. So that trial has begun as well at 2 places overseas, as well as Duke University. And you can see that people have taken on to some of these things. And I predict if we wait another 15 years, maybe 10, that we will have these kinds of treatments that are so important. But look how long it's taken. And the problem with these kinds of things is, how long are patents for? Patents are for 20 years. So you get into biological issues, you get into medical issues, you can outlive your patents. And so you have to keep looking and keep discovering, because those are the things that are going to move you forward. So I wanted to tell that story because I think it's a story that will touch us all, and I think there's hope out there that these kinds of inventions, and that's just me, there's a lot of people working in these types of things, that these kinds of inventions will help us in the future, and hopefully living with brain diseases and brain injury, which is very difficult for many people, will be fixed. So thank you.
Well, hello. My name is Paul Stamets. I grew up in a small town in Ohio, and I grew up in a house that had a very large laboratory in the basement. But I was the youngest one in my family, and my brother John, who later on went into Yale, he was a serious scientist, and I was just the kid who wanted to blow up things. So he kept me away from the laboratory, but when he went off to college, then I had this fully equipped laboratory all for myself, My father served on the aircraft carrier, the Intrepid, and after World War II, we got the Intrepid aircraft carrier radio. So I had this complete, massive radio in the basement. I'd listen to coded messages behind the Iron Curtain. So this really inspired me, and I always thought, when I grow up, I want to have my own laboratory complex. And so now I'm sort of living my dream. And lots of other things happened, but I was always attracted to that which was forbidden. And since mushrooms, which is my specialty, was something that really caused reactions with people, and few people knew much about them, but I really was attracted to that which was forbidden, and mushrooms certainly fitted that category. So my life went on, and I started focusing in on a group of polypore mushrooms. Now, my hat, this hat here, is made from this mushroom, amadou. It's a hard wood conch that grows on birch trees. And this was a mushroom that was made into an invention. It allowed for the portability of fire. Now, we migrated from Africa around 43,000 years ago. We are all African in our ancestry. We discovered something new called winter. Oops. And this mushroom allowed for the portability of fire. So if you could not carry fire, your clan would perish during the winter in Europe. So this allowed for the portability of fire. It's highly flammable. And as it turns out, then when you boil this mushroom, it delaminates and it forms a fabric. And this fabric is also highly flammable. And this hat is made from this mushroom called amadou. Now, this fabric also was reincorporated into another invention. It allowed the flint spark guns to work. This is the original punk in Napoleonic times, and the use of this amadou mushroom revolutionized warfare to allow guns and rifles to ignite the gunpowder. Well, this also was used for drying flies, for fly fishermen, for hundreds of years. For hundreds of years, it was also used by beekeepers for smoking hives. It's now more recently discovered to be the first source of an antiviral ever discovered from a mushroom against the tobacco mosaic virus, I think back in the 1970s. Well, my interest in these polypore mushrooms grew over the years, and I really became interested in a group of Fomitopsis species. This is the red-belted polypore, the most common polypore in the world. This is one of the most rarest polypore mushrooms in the world. This is called agaricon. Agaricon only grows in the old-growth forests of the Pacific Northwest, Northern California, Oregon, Washington, and British Columbia, and a few sky islands in Europe. Well, after 9/11, because I wrote review articles on novel antivirals from mushrooms, and was published in a peer-reviewed journal, the BioShield Biodefense Program got in touch with me. I submitted over 700 samples of these mushrooms to the BioShield Biodefense Program, and hit some huge home runs against pox viruses, flu viruses, and herpes viruses. In fact, we had the best results of more than 2 million samples, pharmaceutical included, in the BioShield program. There's a vetted press release from DOD. There's a National Public Radio interview with myself in the BioShield program, the Deputy Director of the FDA. So we really hit a huge home run of something unanticipated. I got very excited about the antiviral properties of these mushrooms, and then I began to think back now, because this mushroom is so rare. We only have 10 to 12% of the wood debris on the ground historically that we have evolved to be in contact with. Now, 12,000 years ago, we invented agriculture, but for literally millions of years, we were forest people. We were forest dwellers. And so you're looking at the landscapes and how much we've changed them from an evolutionary point of view. We've robbed the menu of nature of wood decomposing fungi and the base amount of wood in the environment. So I had a series of very strange experiences, and I did receive a nice patent on this, thankfully, after 10 years. The US government hijacked the patent because of biosecurity out of the patent office. I had to do an intergovernmental agency trace to pull it back because of biosecurity, for the same reason that you can't file a patent on a nuclear weapon without the US government saying, let's look at it. So I finally got it back, unanimity of opinion, 10 examiners. Last July, I received this patent. Well, a friend of mine came to me and he asked, Paul, can you do something about the bees and colony collapse disorder? And it just, I have 8 patents on entomopathogenic fungi that control insects. And I thought, that's interesting, because in 1984, I had a garden, and I put this mushroom called the garden giant in my garden. And I put it in wood chips about this thick. And one day in July, I go out to my garden, and it's covered with bees, the wood chips. And the bees moved the wood chips away, exposed the mycelium coming up, and sipped on the little droplets of mycelium. And for 40 days, I recorded this. They went from my garden giant patch from my garden, disregarding other flowers around the garden, into the beehive from dawn to dusk, a continuous convoy of bees. Wow, I wrote this up and published in Harrow-Smith magazine in 1988. I put a photograph in one of my books in 1994, thinking, well, oh, bees are going to the mycelium because of the sugar droplets, you know. And everyone ignored me. One beekeeper from Ontario wrote me, saying, maybe that's why bees go to sawdust piles in the summertime. So when my friend asked me, what can you do to help the bees? And I started just laying in bed and thinking, and that's the great time for me to invent, is between sleep and wakefulness, when the synapses haven't fully connected, but you're in that dream state. And then I had this epiphany. I couldn't believe it. I go, oh my gosh, I have an idea. I wrote a 120-page patent with no evidence whatsoever. And then I approached several universities. When I got to Washington State University and told them my idea, they said, stop, don't go anywhere else. Let us do these experiments. So I went to Washington State University, Steve Shepard. Long story short, for the past year and 3 months, we have conducted all these studies, and it's Dr. Steve Shepard's famous quote. He's the Thurber chair of the chair of entomology at Washington State University. In 39 years of research, he has never seen anything extend the life of bees more than this. I've discovered basically something that I think is fundamental to the foundation of nature, is that we were forest dwellers. We were intimate contact with the ecosystems, and that the mycelium from these mushrooms extends the lives of bees, but moreover, we looked at the viral loads that the mites are injecting into the bees. And the viruses skyrocket under the controls, and when they are fed these extracts diluted up to 1,000 to 1, the viral populations decline precipitously, and the bee life is extended, so the worker bees now can go out and forage more, and I think I have a key component for overcoming colony collapse disorder. So, but this is more significant than just for bees. The fact that it reduces viruses that harm humans, these mushrooms, and in fact, the virus that harms pigs, H1N1, birds, H5N1, this is what my patent is on, bats carrying Ebola, and bees. Those are, 5 different animal species that hold in common the influence of these mushrooms reducing viruses that harm them. And I propose to you as the hypothesis, it may well be that these forest-dwelling fungi control the immunological health of the animals that walk within those forested habitats. Because we are denaturing nature, that we've destroyed the wood debris in the forest, we've robbed the menu, and we have disequilibrium now occurring in the ecosystem because we are creating an imbalance from an evolutionary point of view is unprecedented. So the story gets very bizarre because the BioShield program, we went back to NIH Virology, they were governing it, and we said we want to submit more samples. I have the largest collection of agaricon strains in the world, 70 strains, 1 out of 100 attempts in the old growth forest, we might find it, even if you're skilled. And they said, well, we won't do bioprospecting for you. You can send in samples to NIH Virology, but you have to send us in what's called a pure structure, a chemical. Well, I was sending in liquid extracts from the mycelium droplets. There's 200,000 compounds inside the mushrooms. Which one would I choose? And I knew so I don't know how to describe this other than just damn good luck, scientific intuition, or an educated guess. But I looked at the delignification pathways as the wood is being rotted. And what I think I discovered is bees go to rotted logs. We all grew up with Winnie the Pooh, but no one made the connection that bees go to rotted logs because the mycelium gives them immunological benefit. So I look at the decomposition pathways of lignin being broken down, and I studied a group of polyphenols. And so I looked at the polyphenols being produced by mycelium breaking down wood. I got 20 polyphenols, pure compounds. I sent 10 of those to NIH Virology, and then about 3 months ago, the results came back, and 4 of the 10 polyphenols that I sent in beat the positive drug controls, beat acyclovir, cidofovir, ribavirin, against the norovirus, Epstein-Barr virus, and varicella zoster, beat the pants off of acyclovir, which is the varicella zoster creates shingles. And so how likely is it that I would leapfrog? It takes 10 years, millions of dollars to do biograded fractionation, but I was able to do it in one intuitive step. And this, I think, is what's been called the crack in the cosmic egg. Sometimes inventors study a subject to a point where it becomes intuitive. And I don't know if it was my synapses in my brain when I was waking up, made these connections, but it just defies logic that the biggest pharmaceutical industries in the world had not discovered these compounds, because NIH would not accept the structures if they had already been studied. So when we submitted the molecules for application, they had to go through a peer review panel to make sure they had not been studied before. So I believe that habitats have immune systems. We have immune systems. All animals and life on this planet have immune systems. And the mycelium of these wood foresting fungi are the immunological bridges that connect us all. Thank you.
So I just wanted to thank you very much. That was a very brief ability for our audience to get to hear from our AAAS-Lemelson Invention Ambassadors. This is our inaugural class, and we are using this as our kind of thank you to the ambassadors, our transitioning event, because we hope they stay with this program, but this is the last year that they have actual expectations, other than all the ones that we'll now throw on them later. And I'm glad that you got a chance to hear a little bit from them. We're also going to have a reception after this so that you have the opportunity to talk to the ambassadors more and that they have the opportunity to talk with each other. We also have Invention Ambassador, AAAS-Lemelson Invention Ambassador tumblers for each of you to take with you as a thank you for coming out this evening. And more than anything, I want to thank the Invention Ambassadors for this incredible year they've spent with us. I also want to thank our unsung heroes, which are in our evaluation team of Jamie Miller and Kristen Applaw, and our staff that's here, Hasna Sully-Ross and Neela White, who spends 100% of her time working to make this program better. And we also have one of our working group members here, Rieko Yajimo. So we all spend a lot of time trying to celebrate and highlight the role that invention plays, and I hope that you'll get a chance to talk with all of us this evening. Again, we have some tumblers and we have some articles, and we're going to leave the store open a little bit so people can buy things from here if you haven't had the opportunity. More than anything, we want to say thank you very much to the National Park Service for putting this on for us. It was an incredible experience to spend the day here. I think we were overwhelmed with all the information we got and just this whole complex. So thank you again. Look forward to seeing all of you later.